All right, so welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And today, we are going way back in time, thousands of years, to unpack a story from the book of Genesis.
Oh, wow.
Genesis chapter 13. And,
Okay.
it's a story about family fortune and some seriously tough choices. And you know what? There's some surprisingly relevant stuff in there for us even today.
I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, I think you're going to like this one.
Yeah.
So for those who may not be super familiar, can you give us a little bit of a background on Genesis 13?
Sure. So Genesis 13 is interesting because it deals with conflict that arises not from scarcity, but from abundance.
Okay.
You have Abram and his nephew Lot, both returning from Egypt, absolutely loaded with livestock and possessions, and that's where the problem starts. They've got so much, their herdsmen are literally bumping into each other trying to find grazing land.
So it's like a good problem to have in some ways, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm picturing this, like two powerful, wealthy families in a tense standoff.
Yeah.
Kind of like a reality TV show waiting to happen. But Abram, the elder, takes a totally unexpected approach.
Mm-hmm.
He basically says to Lot, hey, look, I don't want any bad blood between us. You pick first. Take whatever part of the land you want, and I'll take whatever's left.
Now, on the surface, that seems incredibly humble and generous, wouldn't you say?
It does, yeah.
But when we dig a little deeper, it makes you wonder, was Abram playing a brilliant long game here?
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Think about it. By letting Lot choose, he avoids conflict and positions himself as the peacemaker.
Right.
Plus, he gets to see what Lot values, which tells him a lot about his nephew's character.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Right.
So maybe Abram wasn't just being a saint,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still a lot of wisdom in that approach.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you think about how often we get caught up in fighting over scraps.
Mm-hmm.
Instead stepping back and seeing the bigger picture like Abram did.
I agree.
So Lot, he's drawn to the fertile plains of Jordan. Everything's lush and green, perfect for his herds.
Right.
Plus, it's right next to this bustling city, Sodom. So it's pretty tempting, right?
Yeah, Sodom, the Vegas of its day. Lots of action, lots of opportunity, but also known for its, shall we say, less than stellar reputation.
Right.
Lot's choice really highlights the tension between immediate gratification and thinking about long-term consequences.
Mm-hmm.
He's going for what looks good right now without fully grasping the potential downsides.
But that's that saying, all that glitters is not gold.
Yeah.
Right. But here's where things get really interesting. God steps in
Mm-hmm.
after Lot heads off to his glittery plains. God reaffirms his covenant with Abram, promising him the whole land, countless descendants, the whole 9 yards.
And that's a key point here. A covenant, in biblical terms, is a sacred, unbreakable promise.
Right.
God is basically saying to Abram, dude, I got you. You made a sacrifice, you put faith and family first, and I'm going to honor that. Even though Abram seems to have gotten the rough end of the deal, in human terms, he's actually in a much stronger position spiritually.
So it's interesting, right? It's that whole idea of like short-term versus long-term.
Right.
Like what might seem like a loss in the moment
Right.
could actually be setting you up for something much greater down the road.
Exactly.
Okay, so what happens next?
Well, Abram settles in a place called Hebron and does something that really speaks volumes about his character.
Okay.
He builds an altar. And it's not just any altar. It's a physical symbol of his gratitude, his devotion, and his continued trust in God.
Mm-hmm.
Even when things haven't gone exactly according to his plan.
That's such a powerful image, right?
It is.
Like even in the face of what could have been a really disappointing situation,
Right.
he chooses to focus on the positive, to express his gratitude.
Yeah.
So we've got conflict resolution, wise decision-making, and trusting in a bigger plan,
Mm-hmm.
all packed into this one little story. But how does all of this ancient wisdom apply to our lives today?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's what we should talk about next.
Let's do it.
Think about it. You're in a tense negotiation at work, or maybe you're trying to settle a disagreement with a family member. It's so easy to dig in your heels, fight for every inch, try to win, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what if instead we channeled a little bit of Abram's energy?
Okay.
What if we took a step back and said, okay, you go first. What's most important to you?
That's such a powerful shift in perspective.
Right.
Because like you said before, it not only diffuses the conflict,
Mm-hmm.
but also gives you valuable information about what the other person really wants. It's like you're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Exactly. And speaking of playing the long game,
Yes.
let's talk about Lot's decision to settle near Sodom.
Okay.
It reminds me of how often we get caught up in the allure of what's shiny and new.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
That new job with the bigger paycheck, but maybe a toxic work environment.
Oh, yeah, been there.
Or that investment opportunity that promises a quick return but feels a little too risky.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, isn't it?
It is.
We're wired for instant gratification. But Lot's story is a cautionary tale. He went for what looked good on the surface, but ended up paying a heavy price in the long run. And, Sodom wasn't just some abstract concept of wickedness.
Right.
Historically speaking, it was a city known for its exploitation, its disregard for the vulnerable, its rampant materialism.
Right. It was all about excess and pleasure, but at the expense of others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a crucial point to remember when we're making decisions. It's not just about what we gain, but also about the potential cost, not just to ourselves, but to the people around us, to the world we live in.
So are you saying we should always play it safe, avoid anything that seems remotely risky or exciting?
Not necessarily, but it's about asking the right questions, right?
Okay.
What are my values?
Mm.
What am I willing to compromise?
Right.
And am I being honest with myself about the potential consequences, both good and bad?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like Abram, making the right choice means taking a path that doesn't look as appealing at first glance.
And that requires a whole lot of trust, doesn't it? Trust in something bigger than ourselves, trust that there's a plan, even when we can't see the whole picture, just like Abram trusted in God's covenant.
Speaking of which, I think it's important to unpack what that covenant really means. It wasn't just a transaction, you do this and I'll do that kind of deal.
Right.
It was about a deep, enduring relationship built on faith and loyalty. And Abram, by choosing peace over conflict, by putting his trust in God, he was basically strengthening that bond, deepening that connection.
So it's not just about believing in a higher power. It's about actively nurturing that relationship through our choices, our actions, our way of being in the world.
Exactly. And that brings us to Abram's act of building an altar. It's easy to overlook that detail, but it's so powerful because it shows that even in a moment that could have been filled with resentment or disappointment, he chooses gratitude. He chooses to acknowledge the blessings in his life, even though he just walked away from what seemed like the better deal.
So how do we build our own altars in the midst of modern life with all its distractions and demands? What does that even look like?
Well, it's different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
For some people, it might be a literal altar, a space for prayer or meditation. For others, it might be a daily gratitude practice, spending time in nature, or simply carving out time for quiet reflection. It's about finding those practices that connect us to something larger than ourselves, something that nourishes our souls and reminds us of what truly matters.
And I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Oh,
We've covered a lot of ground, from conflict resolution to decision-making to the importance of cultivating a spiritual practice. But there's one more thought I want to leave you with, and it all goes back to that question of trust. We talked about Abram's trust in God's covenant, but think about it this way. What are the covenants we make in our own lives? Maybe it's with our families, our friends, our communities, or even with ourselves.
mhm.
It's about those promises we make, those commitments we hold dear, even when they're tested, even when they require us to make sacrifices or choose the harder path.
It's about those deep connections and honoring those connections.
Exactly. Because, let's be real, life rarely goes exactly according to plan. There are going to be times when we're tempted by the modern-day Sodoms, those shiny distractions that promise quick rewards but might lead us astray from our true north.
All the time, right?
Yeah, and that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? That's where our values, our faith, our covenants, if you will help us navigate those choppy waters, they're our compass, our anchor, our guiding light.
They really are, and they help us to stay grounded and to remember what's truly important.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis 13, I'm left with this question for you, dear listener. What are the covenants you're holding in your heart right now? What choices are you facing that might require a little bit of Abram's wisdom, his generosity, his long-term vision, and his unwavering trust?
Maybe it's a conflict that needs resolving, a decision that requires looking beyond the immediate benefits, or simply a commitment to building your own altar. Those practices that nourish your soul and keep you grounded.
Whatever it may be, I hope this ancient story has sparked something within you. A reminder that even in the midst of our modern chaos, there's timeless wisdom to be found, and the power to choose a path that aligns with our deepest values.
So keep diving deep, my friends. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those hidden gems of wisdom wherever you may find them.
And until next time, may your journey be filled with purpose, peace, and the courage to choose what truly matters.